morning. It's a beautiful Christmas morning, and we are doing day number 13 of the fast of Daniel, and we're going to be talking about the fruit of, depending on what version of the Bible that you use, it's either the word gentleness appears in this list in Galatians 5, or it's meekness. They both have the same root in the ancient Greek. So if you think of gentleness, it seems like a very sweet word. You think of, little babies, how you treat pets, how you treat little animals. You think of being gentle in that way. That's kind of the thought that comes to mind when you think of gentleness, being gentle, being kind, being thoughtful, and so forth. But I kind of want to focus on this word meekness, because I think it really, it's a really misunderstood word. Normally, we don't even use this word meek in English much anymore. I mean, it's always considered a really negative word. Like if you think somebody who's meek, they're weak, right? Meek, they're weak. That guy who's spineless, who can't stand up for himself, the kind of wimpy guy, we don't see it as a positive. So that's kind of why I want to use that word to really emphasize the power of this fruit. That the ancient Greek word for meekness, or meek, to be meek, actually is a very powerful word. What it means is not that you're a doormat and let people walk all over you. What it means is a person who is armed, who is fearsome, who is ready for battle at any moment, and yet chooses not to use his weapon. He has the discernment to know not to use his weapon, to keep his sword in its sheath. So that gives a whole different light to meekness. It doesn't mean a pushover. It doesn't mean a wimpy person. So let's look at another verse in the Bible. So meekness is listed in Galatians 5. There's another verse in Matthew 5:5, and it is the Sermon on the Mount. That's where Jesus says, "And the meek shall inherit the earth." The meek shall inherit the earth. And again, our mind goes to, well, how is that possible? You're just a doormat, you're just weak, you don't have any spine, you don't stand up for yourself, and God's going to pity you and feel so sorry for you and say, hey, here, you can have this because you're such a weak, spineless person. That's not what Jesus meant. He meant both in the fruit of the Spirit and in this message in Matthew on the Sermon on the Mount. What Jesus is meaning is this very person who can fight back, who is strong, who is armed, but willfully chooses to restrain himself. And why does he restrain himself? Because he has the wisdom and the foresight to see that to solve the problem that is facing him requires a different weapon, requires restraint, that just the act of restraint is going to be the solution to that problem. The act of not lashing out, the act of not being angry, the act of not trying to force something to happen by your own strength. Just by doing that, you are releasing the power of God to fix the situation. Understanding that there are times that we need to step out of God's way. We could fix it ourselves. We could just barge in there and make it all happen by our own strength, and we would make a mess of it because we'd be doing it in our human strength. We could retaliate, we could lash out. But when we step back, we allow a more powerful strength, a more powerful vengeance to come and set things right. That's why God also says in Romans 12, he says, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. Get out of my way. Stop blocking me. Turn the other cheek." Okay, that's meekness. You could lash out, but you choose to turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. If they ask you for your tunic, give them your coat, or your coat, give them your tunic, whatever it is. You hear people complain, yeah, well, that's only in some situations. So, sure, are there some situations where God does want you to stand up and actually use physical force to really demand things, to force people to do what's right? Yes, and those are rare. They do happen. There are in times of warfare, there are times when there's a burglar or someone who's trying to harm you, harm your family. Of course, you're supposed to stand up and defend them. Defend them with your life. Lay down your life for them. Even that example of what a husband is to be in Ephesians 6, when it talks about the roles of the husband and the wife, that the husband needs to be like Christ, who lays down his life for his church, who lays down his life for his wife. Yeah, there are times when there has to be physical aggression that is justified, but those times are very, very rare. So if you're really upset at this whole idea of being meek, and you're trying to cling to your right, that sometimes you have the right to be mad and yell at people, okay, it's true. There are some times that you will know in your spirit when is the time to stand up and actually use force. God will know. God will show you. So if you look, though, across the span of this past year, how many times was that ever justified? How many times did you have a burglar break into your house? How many times were you in a war zone? How many times were you supposed to stand up and really get mad at people and put them in their place? And compare that to how many times you actually did it. Maybe there were a few times that really were justified, but our tendency, just looking across the span of a year, our tendency is that we want to make things done and happen our way. We want justice. We want to exact justice our way. We want revenge our way. We want to put people in their place our way. And that is not meekness. Meekness is powerful when we let God be the one that fixes it. So if you're the kind of person that is always trying to put people in their place, put those drivers on the road in their place, because how dare they, slow down in the speeding, in the fast lane or whatever it is that they do. It's time to understand that you're missing out on a huge blessing. Jesus promises that the meek will inherit the earth in Matthew 5:5. There are other promises on the Sermon on the Mount where it talks about, you'll inherit the kingdom of heaven, or you will see God, or whatever. Those are beautiful promises. Interesting, though, that the meek inherit the earth. In other words, when you are meek, when you could lash out and you restrain yourself, you change the climate, the spiritual climate around you, so that things here on this earth change. So that the situations that are unjust and unfair, the people that don't treat you well, the people that have been unfair to you, all of a sudden change. You just deciding not to react. You're stepping back, and then God's justice is coming in and makes things right. He humiliates those who are proud. He brings low those who try to raise themselves up. He changes situations, and all of a sudden, you have favor. You have favor. God gives you favor. Why? What did you do? You restrained yourself. You allowed God to work. You may even say, well, I'm not that kind of person that lashes out. I'm a very quiet person. I don't get angry with anyone. I never raise my voice to anybody. Okay, but how about in your mind? How about in your heart? Because this is a fruit of the Spirit that isn't just about what you do outwardly. This isn't just about how you speak outwardly to people. What kind of thoughts do you harbor inside your mind? How many times are you just seething and boiling and mad about things inside, and you just carry it inside yourself, and it often turns into a depression. It often turns into a state of oppression, or you're just in this fog, in this dark place, because you're carrying all this sense of injustice. This isn't fair, and how dare this happen? When are these people going to change? And how come God isn't doing something for me? How come God doesn't care about me? That's not meekness. Meekness It's implicit in meekness that you trust in God. Implicit in being meek, you can't stand back. You see something that's not right, and you have the weapon that you could pull out and attack, and you choose to keep it sheathed. You're standing back. What is implicit? It is implicit that you're trusting that you have a mighty God who's going to fight for you, and you don't want to get in his way. He's going to fight. He's going to defeat your enemies so much, just like Gideon and the Midianites. They just watched their enemies just jump up in terror and run away and kill each other, slaughter each other, just like Jehoshaphat, just like so many other examples where enemies destroyed enemies because the angel of the Lord went and set an ambush. This is what meekness does. How many times have you wished God would just destroy your enemies for you? But are you meek? Are you bearing that fruit of meekness? How many times are you lashing out at people? How many times are you, making snide remarks, cutting remarks? How many times are you just thinking negative thoughts in your mind about how unfair this is, how unfair that is, and how, if it was up to you, you would go and do this and that. You're harboring a spirit of revenge. Maybe you're not actually acting on it, but that spirit is blocking the fruit of meekness to be born in you. This is very powerful. It's a weapon that doesn't look like a weapon. It's a weapon that the devil wants you to think is weakness, is wimpiness. It is nothing like that. It's powerful. And it's a fruit that God wants us to bear so that he can bring justice into our life, so that we can inherit the earth. We can enjoy this life right here before we die and go to heaven. Meekness opens that door. So think about that today as you interact with family. Maybe you're going to be having a big Christmas meal together. Maybe someone's going to say something that offends you. Maybe you're going to have to hang around people you don't want to be with. Meekness. Remember, let God set things right. Keep your weapons sheathed. Be gentle, loving, kind, and you will inherit the earth. God bless. See you tomorrow.